What's up, Welcome to Nostalgia? Dave here in their podcast. What's going on in pop culture right now? This week, of course, we have to talk about Spider-Man Brand New Day, the biggest movie event of the year, as well as Ariana Grande's new album, Petal. Also talked about the new Red Velvet release and the new film, I Want Your Sex. Make sure you subscribe. YouTube.com/nostalgiapod, linktree.com/nostalgiapod. See the links below. Leave a comment. Let me know it's good. Let's get into it. What's up, Back Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of Red Velvet's third summer mini album, Velvet Summer. I think if we add it all up, this is around the 15th EP from Red Velvet. This year, of course, marks 12 years in the game for the SM Entertainment K-pop group, and because of their long-running stature, they don't return nearly as often as newer groups do. It's been a good 2 years since their last release, Cosmic, came to us, and 2 years, of course, an eternity in K-pop. But I think with the case of Red Velvet, we're just happy to get new music from them, given their elder statesman status, and that's certainly the case with Velvet Summer. Does anything here reach the previous highs they've achieved earlier in their career? No, not particularly. But when you get SM release that's more traditional, aka powerful vocals, actually sung choruses, it's a bit of a refreshing change given where the general K-pop trends are these days. To me, the clear highlight of this EP is Hot Girl's Cold Vibe, which is just the most energetic and propulsive of all the tracks here. Overall, a lot of this is a little more mid-tempo than I would have expected. I also really appreciated Hula Hoop, which has a nice dancey groove, bit of an earwormy hook going on. It's also great to hear a true harmonized chorus from the group on songs like Surfin' Boy, just because the vocals are actually here, so when they harmonize, it actually sounds great. Again, not something that we can say for every new group these days. So yeah, I'm just happy that Red Velvet's still kicking. I think of my favorite recent releases from them, the last handful of years, I still think One Kiss from a few years back is definitely my favorite. Just I think that's the most like vocally engaging song they've done, and these songs here, they're not trying to reach the same level as a song like that. I guess you could compare this a little bit more to Cosmic overall. Production wise, I did think Surfin' Boy was solid. You know, these really silky, sumptuous drums are very present here, kind of more of like a throwback energy to how that song sounds. As I mentioned, that harmonized chorus really grabs you, but again, notably down-tempo. Hot Girl's Cold Vibe has this really cool whisper chant at the very beginning, clearly marking a big shift from Surfing Boy before it. Just more of like a playful tempo. I like the way the vocals, they bounce over the bass drum. It sounds great. Bit of a guitar undercurrent present as well. Some awesome vocal moments right before the outro as well. Orchestra is definitely more of an ethereal song, but that elegant, dangerous hook is pretty sticky. As I mentioned, Hula Hoop, very bubbly vocals. I like the kick drum tempo here. Dancey groove, that hula hoop hook, pretty catchy, not gonna lie. And then lastly, there's Hawaii, which is the closer, but some solid acoustic present there. So, you know, this album, I think it sounds kind of like intentionally like mid-level energy. It's not going too hard. And it would be cool to hear them go hard again, just because, again, they're vocally more or less unmatched with any of their contemporaries at this point. It is cool to hear this vibe from an SM group still. Of course, Red Velvet, this has always been their vibe, but like, you know, you think about aespa, which is of course a very vocally forward group as well, but definitely experiment with a lot of other genres. Hearts to Hearts, notably a big shift, not a vocally forward group for SM. Red Velvet, good to get the reminder once in a while. Let me know where you at with Velvet Summer, what's your favorite song? And for more music reviews, more K-pop reviews, subscribe. I'll see you next time. What's up, Back Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of I Want Your Sex, the new erotic comedy film from Gregg Araki, starring Cooper Hoffman and Olivia Wilde. This film premiered back at Sundance earlier this year and is now getting a small release from Magnolia Pictures. And of course, the film is notable because Gregg Araki has not directed a film for 12 years to this point. He's been doing more TV work of late. So of course, this is a notable return given his vast filmography from the 90s and 2000s. I wanted to like I Want Your Sex more than I ended up liking it, but I do still welcome films like this because, simply put, we don't really get erotic comedy films anymore. And when we do get them, they're incredibly chaste, they're incredibly safe. And it's not to say that I Want Your Sex is taking a ton of risks and is super raunchy or risque. In fact, it is pretty tame. That being said, It's a very amusing story with a ridiculous premise and two incredibly committed performances from its leads. Cooper Hoffman is excellent as this young assistant to a famous artist who quickly finds himself in over his head when that artist takes a liking to him and initiates a sexual relationship that of course is not safe for work. And that artist is played by none other than Olivia Wilde, who is incredibly game to play this ridiculous character. There's also amusing supporting work from Charlie XCX, who's playing very off-type as this very uptight by-the-book character. And we also have Chase Subi Wonders, who unsurprisingly is incredibly hilarious in her scenes. I guess my biggest note with the movie is I think just kind of plot-wise, story-wise, it does get a bit predictable. You understand where it's going, and I think its commentary is wise, but perhaps a bit, again, a little obvious, a little on the nose. There's clearly a comment here on generation gaps and how Gen Z relates to sex and hedonism and enjoyment and things like that. It's well observed, but also not incredibly deep. But again, we don't get movies like this anymore. And even though there's not a ton of real nudity at all in this movie, Olivia Wilde is not bearing at all. She is definitely putting herself in more sexual positions than she was in, say, The Invite, her movie from just a few weeks ago. And in this case, she's playing a very different character. I think if you compare these two movies together, it's quite the double feature and quite the series of performances from Wilde, who I think is great in both movies. And Hoffman just has a screwball energy to his performance, which is very endearing, even if the character he plays is not the most likable guy due to his really ridiculous spiral that his character finds himself in. I also found Mason Gooding quite amusing in this movie as well. Definitely some good queer humor with his character. There is the framing device of Johnny Knoxville and Margaret Cho playing these two police officers or detectives who are interviewing Cooper Hoffman's character Elliot, asking him about what's happened to him after things spiral out. So there's this frustrating foreshadowing that you know things are going to fall out, really kind of eliminating any kind of suspense of where the plot's going to take itself. But still a fun time and certainly a product of a bygone era in a certain sense. But let me know, what did you think of this movie? Did you like it more than me? I think the humor is definitely the strongest element of the movie more than anything else. Where you at with it? And for more film reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of Ariana Grande's 8th album, Petal. This is, of course, the follow-up to Eternal Sunshine from early 2024, but Ariana Grande has been incredibly busy between these two albums, of course, going on back-to-back press runs for her co-starring role in Wicked Part 1 and Part 2, earning an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress for the first movie, creating a few original songs for those films, as well as, of course, recording the entire soundtrack. She's been out there, she's been busy, and basically right after Wicked Part 2 came out, we got word officially of this new album, Petal, coming to us. She's already about halfway through the Eternal Sunshine tour. I'm curious to what degree she's going to shake up that track list now that this new album is out in full. And we know that later this year in the fall, she will have a big role in the new film Focker-in-Law, of course, the latest Meet the Fockers film after several years. And I think that is a film that has a chance to be a big hit, due in part to Ariana Grande's excellent comedic acting talent. And of course, when you think about that, think about the past few years, in addition to some comments Ariana Grande has shared where music is not going to be the only thing on the mind for her career moving forward. She, of course, is going to continue to release new music, but perhaps at a slower clip than she has, the last 12 years or so, as she's, of course, rocketed to the top of the A-list when it comes to pop music. Therefore, I think a lot of Ari fans were anticipating Petal and what this could represent, given it might be the last new album for a longer wait than usual. Ariana Grande's 8th album, Petal, is very interesting to me because of what it represents for Ariana's sound and how it changes things up from previous expectations most people would have for her. The star of this album is the production choices, and we haven't really ever said that before with an Ari album. The textbook trademark Ariana Grande vocal flexing, vocal flair, incredible high notes in the mold of Mariah Carey before her, that is not really present on Petal at all. This album is more concerned with setting the right mood, and we've seen this on some of her past albums, but Ari is very interested in vocal layering, the mix, the composition of these songs is incredibly detailed and intricate. It's clear when watching behind the scenes videos of her in the studio how involved she is with the
tinkering of these various songs and the vocal stems and the background vocals and everything in between. This is an album about its composition, and it's not a traditional maximalist Ari album as a result. Personally, I like this vibe. I think it sounds cool. The consistent use of synths, the way the drums pop in, songs like Petal and Stay and Big Feelings, when these beats are working, Ari is able to really jump in vocally and have a great time with these, despite the fact that, again, she's operating in a more mid-register than we're used to. However, when the beats are not all the way there, this style of Ari singing doesn't really do enough to save the song. But I do think the album is pretty cool. It's clear that from her headspace, from her public comments, that she's got some feedback for people's feedback. Of course, that's very obvious from the lead single, Hate That I Made You Love Me, which has become a big hit already. I think a song like Big Feelings, with how groovy it is, a song like I Do, which is a bit more energetic, I think there's some hit potential on this album for sure, but also it probably won't engender the same amount of fandom in the same way her more traditional early works did. But I can't help but be, pretty impressed with what this actually is, just because, again, this is the 8th record. She's been in the public eye under incredible scrutiny for a long time, and she was able to make something that, to me, sounds really authentic to her and how she presents these days. And also is, I think, interesting musically, because there's a lot of new choices here. And also there's a continuity from Eternal Sunshine in particular, with this new path forward where her really layering in on her songs seems to work to good effect. The first song, Kiss Me, you get a blast of synth right away. It's a true statement of intent of what kind of beats you're about to hear. Overall, it's a pretty quirky beat, but I think it's a fun compliment for Ari vocals. She has this very peppy cadence on the song. The chorus, super layered. I like the way it sounds. And then the second verse, a little bit more of a bouncy flow from Ari. Great intro for sure. Hate That I Made You Love Me, of course, the lead single, as I mentioned. I think it's a cool chorus because it's a bit of a different affectation for Ari. Again, still a bit of a downshift, with that slower cadence, but has strong snares, very matter-of-fact lyrics on that bridge. And I think this single actually makes a lot more sense in its album context, where when you first heard it independently as a lead single, people were like, oh, wow, this is kind of a different energy than what most people expect from her. But now it just makes a lot more sense, obviously. Petal, the title track, I think this one's awesome. The exasperated, more high-pitched vocals from Ari sound really cool. She's talked a lot, I think, last year about intentionally going up to a higher pitch when she's trying to save her voice and preserve her voice, depending on her day-to-day. You do hear that a little bit in this album as well. I mean, this track's really cool with the distortion and the way those drums drop in. Definitely one of the ones that I want to revisit the most. Stay, I think this one's a huge banger for sure. Awesome beat. The synths are super twinkly. To me, when I heard this, I was like, okay, I'm really feeling the vision for the album to that point. You have this more staccato cadence from Ari over the beat with these hard kick drums. And on the chorus, you get some true auto-tune flair, which was really fun. Lyrically, I think a song like this perhaps is a bit more understated, but I think it works well. And the outro, you get even more of the vocal layers to conclude the song. Really cool for sure. Oh Well, another twinkly start. More of like a breakbeat style production. The tempo is definitely up on this one. The vocals, again, very light, very airy, but still some fun vocal breakdowns at the same time. Big Feelings, as I mentioned, I like this one quite a bit. The bass, the piano, very groovy. The last section right before the outro, some really fun vocal mix decisions going on there. Freak, definitely more of like a moody guitar on this one, but the layered vocals are here once again. I think vibe-wise, perhaps a bit more downtrodden. Like I Do, though, much more energetic with this kind of ominous beat with the way the bass drops. Definitely a highlight for me. Never Get Over Me, you have these lively snares and the keys, and the chorus is strong here as well. Bad Thing, Bunny Hop, lively once again, like the drums in the chorus. I think vocally it's a bit quieter from Ari, and I think this is a moment where maybe the vocals don't quite do enough. And then lastly, you have Nowhere Nobody, which has a pretty interesting use of the vocoder effect, of course, famously used somewhat recently by Taylor Swift on a song like Delicate. So yeah, I mean, you listen to this and it's like, okay, well, this is not, No Tears Left to Cry Ariana, right? It's obvious. This is a different side of her artistry and her interest set, and I don't think she has anything to prove vocally. And I think because of the vision of this album, that's what impresses me most, because it does feel pretty cohesive and pretty clear about what she was trying to get into. And, maybe if the lyrics are rehashing familiar themes for her in a certain sense, I don't think anyone can necessarily blame her for that, because there does seem to still be a lot going on. But let me know, where are you at with Petal? How would you compare this to her more recent albums, as well as her discography as a whole? Looking forward to seeing her in Father-in-Law. I will be reviewing that movie when it comes out in a few months. Come back for that. And for more music reviews, subscribe. And I'll see you next time. What's up? Welcome back to Nostalgia. Dave here with a review of Spider-Man Brand New Day, the fourth Tom Holland Spider-Man movie from Marvel and Sony. This, of course, is following up Spider-Man No Way Home, which came out way back in 2021. And that film, of course, was a massive smash hit, becoming the third highest grossing film domestically and the eighth highest grossing film worldwide as of right now. Of course, not adjusted for inflation. That film, alongside Top Gun Maverick and Avatar: The Way of Water, really helped usher people back to the box office as we were coming out of COVID, and of course also played very successfully off of the nostalgia of the past Spider-Man films, of course introducing Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield into the fold. But of course, it's been a few years since that movie, quite a bit, obviously. Tom Holland is now 30 years old. We have subbed out John Watts, who directed those first three Holland films. Destin Daniel Cretton is now stepping up in his place, of course, previously the director of Shang-Chi for Marvel. At one point, he was going to direct Avengers Doomsday before the Russo brothers came back on board. There's a lot to talk about with Spider-Man Brand New Day. We'll talk about the box office at the end, which is looking to be truly mammoth, which is wild for several reasons. We'll get into that. But first, we got to talk about what this film is and what it represents. But it's coming at a very amusing time for its two stars. Of course, Tom Holland and Zendaya are both also in The Odyssey. Tom Holland is effectively the second lead of that film. That film is exceeding all box office expectations as well. Tom Holland also having Avengers Doomsday coming up later this year, we assume, as well as Zendaya having Dune 3 the same day. They're obviously the box office king and queen of 2026. We'll get more to the Brand New Day box office in a bit. But Spider-Man Brand New Day, of course, had a really interesting opportunity for its storytelling, because at the end of No Way Home, of course, Doctor Strange was able to cast his spell and make everyone in the world forget Spider-Man's identity, forget who Peter Parker was specifically. So Peter could go back to anonymity, keeping MJ and Ned safe in the process, but also alienating himself, of course. And I did think that presented a really interesting storytelling opportunity, because it just really shook the die. It really gave you something new to do and new to explore, especially with, as we've been talking about with most Marvel releases post-Avengers Endgame, Marvel just does not have the same storytelling juice, and there's many reasons for that. The movie's quality, the having the course correct away from Kang. We'll see how Avengers Doomsday is received. There's been a lot of reasons, but there's just been kind of less hype and less consistency with these Marvel movies and the storytelling and the kind of lack of a overarching multi-film story that was ongoing. However, Spider-Man, of course, the most popular of all the Marvel characters, arguably the most popular IP character that exists in pop culture, obviously is immune to those general Marvel struggles. We're seeing that with this film's box office. But even though this film was going to be successful no matter what, I was hoping that they would take more chances than they ended up taking, although I'm still pretty happy with a bunch of creative decisions that this film makes, even if it think is a little bit short of greatness. Spider-Man Brand New Day is a very crowd-pleasing Spider-Man story, and when the script is able to slow down and allow for some emotional character beats and character payoff, there's some great stuff here. This is the saddest and most mature Tom Holland's Peter Parker has ever been. He's still playing very young, despite now being a 30-year-old in real life, but it's progress for sure. And the character's loneliness coming into this story makes for some interesting material. I would have loved even more time with Zendaya's MJ, because the Holland-Zendaya scenes are great in this. There's great emotional payoff, and I think some depth to those interactions and that relationship, and how it, of course, has changed following the first three Holland movies. I wish the movie dedicated even more time to that. What we're left with is a story that is often pretty downtrodden and dour because of Peter's psyche most of the time, and it's definitely a vibe shift for sure. However, I was disappointed how overtly MCU this movie still felt. Mark Ruffalo's Hulk has a significant presence in the movie, and John Bernthal's Punisher is a straight up supporting character in the story. That's not to say any of that stuff wasn't good, just kind of got in the way of the Peter MJ stuff. And of course, the movie's key villain, which I think was set up and was realized in an interesting way in a more creative fashion. Once the revelation of who that villain is becomes pretty clear, and if you were paying attention to much of anything in the lead up to this movie, once you start watching the movie, it's incredibly obvious what that reveal is going to be. It was hard not to get there. But once we do finally have all the cards on the table, we do get bogged down with character introduction and greater universe setup for the future. And it's tough to get that in the fourth Tom Holland Spider-Man movie, because the fresh slate that was provided by this film's story starting point could have gone to an even better and more interesting place than it ended up getting. As a result, where this movie concludes is not as much of a character progression as I would have expected. That said, what you actually get is quite crowd-pleasing, and I will spoil the villain in just a moment, but I think most of the set pieces are pretty entertaining. You know, I think there's an early chase sequence revolving a tank in New York City. In general, the kind of web slinging, the movement of Spider-Man, that fluidity, it looks pretty good. You know, this movie wasn't actually filmed in New York, of course. You do have a lot of those drone shots that try their best to mask where this actually was taking place on the ground. But I think the movie largely looks pretty good. CGI wise, it looks pretty good. It certainly helps that this movie is not a cosmic story like, say, Supergirl, for example, right? It does feel pretty grounded despite how comic-y, of course, everything we're seeing is. And the villain, who we get introduced to quite quickly, of course, it's not actually Michael Mando's Scorpion, who's just a means to an end. Shout out Michael Mando getting that check. Happy for him. Tremendous as Nacho on Better Call Saul. That's my guy. The Scorpion stuff was fine for what it was. It doesn't, overstay its welcome. But of course, the main villain, this telepath who's able to take over people's minds and control them and jump from person to person to kind of move around. I think that was realized really well, especially in the fallout of the opening tank chase once the tank arrives at the damage control location, the government agency with one of its locations in New York City. I think that stuff was pretty cool. And as it progresses and Peter is trying to interact with and fight a foe he can't even see and barely detect, good stuff there. I really like that setup. I like how it's realized in the kind of freaky, funky movement, the jumping of the telepath's powers as it moves around. It's creepy. It was cool. I think it worked. And we're contrasting this with Peter, of course, is lonely and kind of throwing himself all the way into his work as a crime fighter, as a protector of the citizens of New York, and because he has nothing else to do, he has nothing else going on, he has no friends, he has no contacts. Liza Colin-Zayas plays like the police commissioner or lead detective or something. Shout out her, amazing on The Bear, nice check for her as well. I think she actually does pretty good in her few moments, just her line reading, some pathos, and the way she performs, good stuff. But Peter quickly starts developing some kind of hormonal imbalances with his arachnid DNA due to the trauma and stress he's putting himself under. And I think that stuff, that's well-trodden territory in Spider-Man storytelling. Spider-Man losing control of his powers, not being fully in control. The web shooters moving to the organic webs. It's familiar ground for Spider-Man fans. But I do think it's realized pretty well. It doesn't come across as too contrived as a way to take Peter's abilities completely off the board. So then as the movie progresses and Peter gets more fully aware of these heightened senses and whatnot, his abilities, feel good, and I think it makes sense in the flow of the story. To me, the clear peak of this movie, though, is when Peter goes to save MJ after kind of having it alluded to him that the villain, the mysterious villain at this point, is going to go after him, or go after her, because, of course, Peter is preventing the villain from getting into damage control and finding what this mysterious VMAX. And he goes and he saves MJ, even though they don't know each other. There's a previous pseudo fake out meet cute at their the new apartment that Ned and MJ are co-renting after coming back to New York post-college. It's been 4 years since No Way Home. He goes and he rescues, or attempts to rescue, abscond to safety, MJ, and he takes her and they talk, and then they have this kiss, And it was actually just a big fake out by the villain. And it was this huge betrayal with, of course, MJ already being possessed. Great stuff there. Actually gives Zendaya another side of her performance in this movie. I loved all that stuff. To me, that was the peak of the movie, just because of the relationship between these characters and the history you have between these characters and their two performers, to say nothing, of course, of Holland and Zendaya's real life, of course, romance and marriage and whatnot. I liked the stuff. I thought it was really nice. And to that point in the movie, is about halfway through, I think they're really rocking. Seeing Ned and MJ and Peter kind of watching them from afar, basically creeping on Instagram. Ned doing these really funny, like, selfie, like, story type videos that are super narrative and expository and didn't seem super realistic, but good stuff there. But Peter's like desperation to talk to his love, and as it eventually progresses, right, and MJ gets taken to the Punisher's, fortress, his dock home, which was a great setting, looked awesome, and they start to connect more, even though she truly has no memory of him. I really think all those scenes are awesome. I really like those scenes, especially the realization when she finds his letter that he was going to give her at the end of No Way Home, but chose not to. All that stuff is great, and I love that there's no like easy, like, by the end of this movie MJ and Peter are back together. Now they made it much more realistic and much more earned, frankly, with that it would take time, and they're going to start off as kind of just friends again. Great stuff. Of course, this leads us to the villain, right? And the villain is revealed to be Sadie Sink, who we knew was in the movie. Sadie Sink getting a massive look out of Stranger Things, frankly, alongside Finn Wolfhard at this point. She is the true breakout out of Stranger Things. I mean, this is kind of a bigger look than Millie has ever gotten, if we're being honest, on the film side. We'll see how those things progress. But Sadie Sink is revealed to be Jean Grey, of course. And everyone watching the movie, of course, knows who Jean Grey is as a member of the X-Men. There was a very audible pop in my theater, which of course was fully sold out, when the name Jean Grey was first uttered. Like, people were hyped on it. And of course, I think Sadie, due to her age, due to her ability, it's an exciting piece of casting to inevitably carry the MCU into the future. Great stuff. However, I didn't love how much of her backstory ended up coming into this movie, because this is the fourth Spider-Man movie. I want a lot of Spider-Man stuff going on. I don't need the Jean Grey origin story in a Spider-Man movie. And I'm sure that plenty of people disagree with me on that, right? Like, it's cool. It's cool to get Jean Grey. I'm excited about getting Jean Grey. I actually think a lot of the Jean Peter material in the movie and their conflict and how it eventually resolves, I think it was good. I think Holland obviously is very at home in this role, and Sadie, I think, did a really good job managing those emotions with the true origins of Damage Control and what they've been up to revealed. It's equally small stakes, New York City bound in the way we expect from Spider-Man storytelling, but also still pretty serious given the tremendous power that Jean Grey has as this, of course, incredibly powerful telepathic mutant. Everyone knows that. Like I said, I feel like the movie kind of crested in the middle, and then that last act, that last 40 minutes, I was like, I'm getting it. Like, obviously we know there's got to be this big thing. Like, obviously New York gets kind of imperiled when Jean kind of pauses everyone in their tracks in this wide radius outside of the Damage Control compound. And I don't think you're just as excited with that momentum as you were in the previous part. Like, seeing Peter fight the Hand, who of course have become allies of Damage Control after Peter took them in. Obviously, it's a cool Daredevil reference, right? It comes up in the movie. But seeing him fight them at the very end of the movie, it's like we're not in the right stakes at that point, And of course, the middle of the movie has probably the best fight, the best set piece in the story, which of course involves Jean going after Damage Control, which is this big, I forget the name, the building right on Central Park, and trying to get in their vault to figure out what this VMAX thing is, right? And she goes after it, and Peter shows up with Punisher in tow as his ally, and then we learn that Jean has already absconded into her service Bruce Banner, aka the Hulk. Peter previously goes to see the Hulk at the college he teaches at to ask him about inhibitor technology because he needs to control his hormones. Like, the use of the Hulk, Of course, it's contrived and very MCU, but I think it worked fine. You know, the use of him, the use of Banner, it made sense in its context. I liked that fight. I think that fight was pretty compelling. The inevitable moment where the Punisher gets taken over by Jean as well. Like, good stuff there. Of course, that all resolved with Jean being taken in by damage control. And I'm like, oh, wow. To that point, what was that, like 90 minutes into the movie or so? I was like, pretty happy with how things have gone this far. Just like the movie has to conclude in a different way where you get so much more Jean Grey. And it just feels like less impactful to me on the Spider-Man side of things. Now, John Bernthal's Punisher being such a big part of the movie, you know, he shows up in the first sequence when the tank is happening, and he's kind of the key contact for Peter throughout most of the movie. Frankly, I actually liked it. You know, I wasn't exactly sure to what degree he was going to be in the movie, but he was in the movie quite a lot. And again, maybe that could be distracting, right, from a Spider-Man movie. Him just being in like consistent support for Spider-Man, of course, also in New York. The anti-hero, in this case, that's where he's based. The John Bernthal character we just got in that special presentation on Disney Plus a few months back. I liked it. You know, I think the humor was awesome. That Bernthal performance is tuned in such a way. I think it works well, and it's cool to see Holland and Bernthal seemingly have a really great working real life relationship that they've talked about a lot recently, because they of course shared many scenes together in the Odyssey, as well as now sharing plenty of scenes in this movie. I like the Punisher's role, but yeah, I think it's a movie that ultimately, like, we have all this stuff with the hormonal stuff, with the arachnid stuff, and Peter trying to get himself back out of a funk. And I just could have used a little bit more Zendaya stuff, a little bit more Ned stuff, frankly, because the Jean stuff kind of gets, when the Jean stuff is not involving Peter protecting MJ, that's when I'm a little less interested, you know. And I do think there's a nice twist, which is the revelation of what VMAX actually is, which is completely inconsequential. It was just a message that Jean received from her previously captured sister as a way to kind of break out and free herself and use her powers in a certain way. Cool fake out with that. But yeah, I was quite entertained by the movie. I've had a hard time revisiting the Holland Spider-Man movies. No Way Home in particular to me did not hold up very well on a second watch. But on the first watch, I was really high on it. I feel like Brand New Day, it's probably either 2 or 3. I have Far From Home as the worst of these movies. And worst, of course, is a relative term. I think, obviously, the Spider-Man films, you know, have the highest quality bar, quite obviously, especially with Captain America having a fall off of Brave New World. I don't even think it's much of a question, right? It's like the Guardians movies and the Spider-Man movies. Those are the pillars of the non, you know, big team up movies like Avengers, right? So I think this was good. I wish it was a little more creative at the end of the day. I wish the opportunity for a true fresh slate for the character was utilized in something a little more interesting. Instead, you get Punisher, you get Hulk, you get the introduction of a brand new big character. That's all kind of classic MCU stuff, you know? And maybe to some people who are watching this, they'll be like, well, MCU hasn't been good at doing that stuff recently. So just kind of doing this, which is something they used to do well all the time, we should be happy with that. And I can understand that take, you know? Looking at this film's box office, the tracking has just gone up and up and up, you know? I mean, I think initially I was like, oh yeah, like this will probably make 200 million, like that, and that'd be massive, right? That would be a huge success. I mean, of course, 200 domestic I'm referring to, and that would be huge. You know, especially you compare that to like how Fantastic Four: The First Steps kind of underperformed. You know what, 500 something worldwide, and Thunderbolts pretty small. You know, the floor has dramatically lowered for superhero storytelling, even if the movies are pretty well received. There's clear attrition at the box office, to say nothing of stuff falling off a cliff like what we just got with Supergirl from DC, right? So I was like, oh, Spider-Man, it'll be good. Like that'll perform, no question. But then this has just gone up and up and up, and then it started to become pretty clear that no, this is going to break No Way Home's domestic record, which was over 260. And now we're to the point where it's no doubt going to gross over $300 million, which of course would be the number 2 record behind Endgame, which is what, 357 or something like that. Now we're talking about breaking Endgame's previews record, which of course is, the Thursday numbers, 660 to 75, something like that. And we're going to break the single day record Endgame had, 150 plus or whatever on the Friday. Gargantuan numbers. And of course, worldwide, we're already starting to see the early signs where like some territories are having like their highest grossing single day ever, beating Endgame. I believe Mexico is one of those days. Worldwide launch, we're talking 800 or 900 million, which is not beating Endgame, but still absolutely crazy, And it's an interesting place to be because the superhero fatigue conversation was real. The data backs that up. The floor had dramatically lowered. The Marvels made like 200 something, right? Fantastic Four, the first steps we thought would be more stronger than it ended up being. It wasn't, Thunderbolts, 200 something. Supergirl, like Joker 2, died on the vine, right? To then see this, what I think it speaks to is that Spider-Man is bigger than the MCU. The MCU's ills, in general superhero fatigue, has affected everything I just mentioned. But Spider-Man, as the clear biggest superhero character, bigger than Superman, bigger than Batman, bigger than any other Marvel character, X-Men, Avengers, Spider-Man has always been at the top. And you're seeing that, right? All ages, all demos, all over the world. The popularity, the enduring popularity, the relatability, like the appeal is there. You have to imagine that this will engender some confidence in Doomsday, but now what I'll be looking for is if Doomsday actually outgrosses this movie or not, because that is no longer a lock by any means, right? And it's also cool to see this from Brand New Day, because of course Brand New Day is getting exactly 0 IMAX theaters worldwide, with Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey having those locked up for the foreseeable future. So for large premium screens, it's on them, but it's on the non-IMAX versions, which is, of course, there's less of those, right? Dolby Cinema, AMC, ScreenX, whatever it might be. Just kind of speaks to this crazy strength. So I'm looking forward to seeing Monday when we get the actual numbers, the actual ticket admissions. You can do the inflation comparisons then. The point is, Spider-Man as a brand is crazy strong. And there's just pent-up demand. I wonder if the kind of lack of fulfilling consistency from superhero movies actually brought more people back to this movie right away, because they just have so much confidence in this movie being good. And of course it is good, despite some of my comments. Also, seeing this performance, I'm very curious how the next animated Spider-Verse film does, which I believe is coming out, next year, 2028? I forget, the date's changed a million times. Because those movies perform well. The second one did more than the first one. But those movies have not come particularly close to the Holland movies. So can the next Spider-Verse movie be a $1 billion grosser? It would say a lot about what animation can accomplish if that was to happen. Animation like that is more all ages and not, Pixar or Disney or something very well known. So that'll be something to look forward to in the longer future. But let me know, where you at on Spider-Man Brand New Day? How did you like this movie? What are you most looking forward to seeing play out with its box office story? Anything and everything, let me know. And for more movie reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.
All right, that's going to do it for the pod this week. Next week, of course, we have the conclusion of House of the Dragon Season 3, new rom-com One Night Only with Monica Barbaro and Callum Turner, Star Wars Visions, the Ninth Jedi spin-off series. I'm very excited about that. Stray Kids new release. I'm also seeing BTS live at concert. Going to talk about that. Make sure you subscribe, youtube.com/nostalgiapod, linktree.com/nostalgiapod. See links below. Leave a comment, let me know it's good. And I'll see you next week.